It's Alcohol and Antiquity, an unsober retelling of the past. Today we have local Bob Dylan expert Dillon LaFollette-James of Floodwater Angel talking about Bob Dylan's transition from protest music into his electric era.
So a lot of people don't know this, but his first album was a bit of a flop. It was his self-titled one in 1963 or 62. In 1962 is his self-titled. I have that one sitting right here. He's got his dumb little hat on the front of this album cover. His first one was a total flop, and the thing about the album is that there was a couple of covers on it, and it wasn't supposed to be like his best songs. It was just his most well-known at the time. He was working on other stuff. But like by the time this album had come out, he had already written his easily most famous song, The Times They Are Changing, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't want to come out with that on his first album. So by 62, he had come out with that first one, and it had sold like just enough copies that Columbia Records were like, okay, I guess you could probably keep him on the record label. He was doing really well in, I don't know, his quote-unquote DIY circuit, because he was really impressive to people like Joan Baez and Richie Havens. If you haven't listened to Richie Havens before, holy fuck.
Oh, yeah.
Richie Havens is probably my favorite folk singer above Bob Dylan even sometimes, because his voice is unbelievable.
Damn. Okay.
I'm drinking Bird Dog apple whiskey. They had it on sale at Thinky Town Liquor.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bird Dog.
The Hy-Vee liquor store was closed, so we just stopped at the one across the street. It was miraculously still open.
I called ahead and asked if they did curbside pickup. You guys done any curbside pickup stuff yet?
Not really.
No, I mean, I made my roommate go because he was going to Cub anyways.
We do a lot of drive-throughs, but we haven't had any curbside.
Shit's so fucking surreal. We did curbside today, me, Jack, and Sam, because depressing. We tore down Wave Mania today.
Oh.
And took all of our stuff in different directions.
Damn, is Sam moving out or something?
Stuff out, and Jack got all Jack's stuff out, and fucking. Anyways, we went to Half Price Books, and Half Price Books is curbside only. Big ass sign out front. Mm-hmm. And Jack bought 2 Guitar Hero guitars for PS2 through the phone, and then they walked it out to us in bags.
Amazing.
That's
I'm like,
weird.
wow, the bottom. This is it. This is the bottom, guys. We're here.
Oh, absolutely.
Holy fuck. Okay, so 1962, he's tearing it up. In 1963, right?
Yeah.
In 1963, we're looking at fucking some of his best folk releases, including The Times They Are Changing. His Freewheelin' album was super successful. I believe that one came out before The Times They Are Changing.
That did. That was the second album in May 1963.
He really got super depressing with The Times They Are Changing, and that song came out. And he got asked to play that song all the time, obviously, because that was his most famous one. And, like, he really hated that song. He hated that song so much. He would rush through it when he opened at concerts. There's a cool Bob Dylan doc you can watch by Penn and Baker called Don't Look Back. And the intro in one of those is he is performing and his microphone isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And his microphone isn't working. They're running around backstage trying to get it to turn on while he's performing The Times They Are Changing. And halfway through the song, the microphone comes back on, and he finishes the song and doesn't go back to it. And everyone gets super upset. And they're like, well, I came here to see that song. Yeah, so
you gotta play the single at some point.
That's very.
Sorry, what was that?
You gotta play the single, like the big song at some point.
Oh yeah, that's the big single.
That's very I know Bob Dylan doesn't like to identify himself as a northern Minnesotan. If you've ever been to the Iron Range, that's how most of those people are. They're just like, fuck it, I'm doing whatever I want.
It's powerful.
This Times They Are Changing album is very good. And the thing about it is obviously the first song is The Times They Are Changing. Mm-hmm. But his better songs on this album are Ballad of Hollis Brown, One Too Many Mornings, Only a Pawn in Their Game. My favorite song off the album is Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. That was one of the first songs I learned on guitar. I might put that on our covers album. That'd be pretty cool. Ooh. It's just a really... It never goes out of style. That song is always accurate. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
It's a whole song about William Zanzinger, who was an actual guy, who murdered a black maid who worked at a hotel that he was visiting, and he had no excuse. He was like, I did it. I don't know why I did it. I just felt like doing it. Me and my friends beat her to death. And that was pretty crazy because he only got 6 months in jail. And then he got out on bail.
That could have happened like last year. Fucking
Exactly. The whole song is just rife with this incredible sarcasm in the chorus where he says that William Zanzinger cried when they announced that he got 6 months for murdering her.
Oh my God.
As if he just completely lost how ridiculous it is that he got capital murder charges and went to jail for 6 months because he's a rich white guy.
Yep.
That song is even better than this Times one, but they kept wanting him to play the Times one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it's like a generational anthem or something. Like all the boomers probably fucking love that shit.
It's easy to sing along
I know.
to.
I read
guess.
a really cool thing about baby boomers using silent generation artists to like speak for them when they didn't. Here's the idea. So the idea is that the baby boomers like to claim that their generation was a protest revolution generation, right?
Oh, no.
That they fought against the Vietnam War and blah, blah, blah. Bob Dylan's birth year, can anyone in this chat tell me what his birth year was?
I got Wikipedia open.
Would have been the 30s?
1941.
41, okay.
1941, exactly. So he
I
wasn't
just
a
knew
baby
that
boomer.
off the top of my head.
Bob Dylan was born at the beginning of World War II
Yeah.
in 1941. So, like, he was technically a silent generation person,
Yeah,
and
he's
so
not a
was
boomer.
Joan Baez, so was Richie Havens, so was Jimi Hendrix. Like, none of these people were baby boomers. They weren't born after 1946. So, I don't know. It's a really cool thing about how, like, boomers aren't actually as politically active as they thought they were. They were just kids when
they
that
try
was
to
all
claim
going
the
down.
60s for themselves when it wasn't.
Ugh. Ugh, so I put the liquor in the bottom of this stein. I got like a German stein with a duck on it.
Ooh.
I put the liquor all in the bottom of the stein. I put the Coke on top, and I didn't really mix it. So I drank through all the Coke, and now it's just whiskey at the bottom. Oh my
Yeah.
Get
God.
into the fun part.
Yeah, I've done that twice, and both times it totally ruined my body, and I puked everywhere.
Whew.
So I hope you don't get sick.
Oh no, I'm gonna be fine. So Bob Dylan starts becoming this fucking voice of a generation, and like you said, he's in North Minnesota, and he doesn't want to be that. So people start like really backing him as like this voice of their generation, and he knows everything, and he's a poet, he's a walking troubadour, and he's cool, and he's got the glasses on. So the moment that changed him from the folk movement was JFK's assassination. When JFK got assassinated, he was really upset because he had felt like none of his folk songs actually meant anything, because all of his friends had just like given up on their folk protest movements because they were like, oh man, they shot JFK. Now Lyndon B. Johnson is president. Everything sucks. And they just gave up. And he was like, all right. So his exact quote was, you can't change anything with a song. So he stops writing folk music, he says, on that day that JFK got shot, which was 11/22/63, which is a really cool Stephen King novel.
Yeah,
if you
I've
ever
heard
have
about
the
that.
chance to read.
They made a show with James Franco, of all people, I think.
Fucking James Franco, of all people, fucking touchy Franco. Fucking
Didn't watch
the show is okay.
Yeah.
You know, Stephen King doesn't know how to write endings, but the book ending is a lot cooler than the show ending.
True. They did that with the Mist. Again, yeah, with like
So-
the endings, but Bob Dylan.
He
By
quit.
Bob Dylan's own words, he stopped writing protest music on the day that JFK was assassinated. So he goes into 1964. He's obviously got a really fat contract with Columbia because his first album was okay. His next two albums were literal gold mines. They were flying off the shelves. His next album after that was called Another Side of Bob Dylan, came out in 1964. And it had, as he says, no protest songs on it. It has a couple of songs on here, like we got Spanish Harlem Incident, I Shall Be Free is on here, but like he specifically states that none of these songs are protest songs. He didn't want to do another protest album, right? So he comes out with this album, and it doesn't do nearly as well as the first two, which he's not even depressed about because he's like, good, I don't really, I didn't really
doesn't
want
care.
it to do that good. I have this little cool bootleg here I can send you guys a picture of, where he played in Carnegie Hall, 1964, with Joan Baez, and he played a lot of those songs. And it's, again, another performance where he rushes through The Times They Are Changing at the beginning, gets it out of the way and over with. And it's got a cool little Halloween thing going on the front of it, and then they're all on the back. Fucking It Ain't Me, Babe is on that one. Mama, You've Been on My Mind. Him and Joan Baez are like on an on-again, off-again relationship. And it's kind of weird because, like, there's a power dynamic there where he sees her as, like, a mentor, but she's, like, super in love with him. I don't know. You know?
I just have the Wikipedia open here. And a really interesting thing that I'm not a huge Bob Dylan head. That's not from a lack of love. It's just a lack of time spent with the albums. But he was doing an interview, and apparently he was planning a movie, and the interviewer asked him about it, and he said it would be a cowboy horror movie. And the interviewer asked him, "Are you going to play the cowboy?" And Dylan says, "No, I play my mother." I don't know what that means, but that's like the most like anti-interviewer thing that you can do. And I like, on one hand, that hurts me, but also I totally respect that, and that's so cool.
So we could take a short, I was going to talk about this anyways, but we could take a short segue. Bob Dylan was very good at stringing interviewers along. And he hated doing interviews. He hated doing interviews because he wanted the music to speak for itself. He didn't want to tell you the story or justify anything. Yeah. He was a poet first and a musician second.
Very true.
He would just toy with people in interviews all the time. And nowadays, obviously, reporters and interviewers are a lot more keen and a lot more honest, and they've seen a lot more stuff. But like back in 1965 and 66, they had no fucking clue what to do with this guy, because at that time, getting interviewed was supposed to be like very respectful, and like you shared your opinions. And like if you were being interviewed by a magazine, it was a big deal. They wanted to put you in the magazine. He would fuck with them all the time. There's one specific one where he lands in London for his 1965 tour, and it was his last acoustic tour before he went electric. And he had already come out with electric music by 1965, and we'll go back, obviously. But he lands in London, immediately is forced to do an interview by Columbia with a bunch of magazines in London for being landed. And he's got this big fuck-off light bulb. And you can search Bob Dylan light bulb, and you'll find this picture of him holding these big light bulbs, right? And anytime he was asked a question, he would just refer back to his light bulb. And it was like a really big one. And like one of them in this Don't Look Back documentary is someone's like, "Do you have any advice for young folk writers, blah, blah, blah." And he said,
My real message? Keep a good head and always carry a light bulb.
He would always give non-answers. And obviously reporters and interviewers now are more keen to that, and they're like, "You're a cool musician." But like back in the day, they had no clue what to do with this guy. Anytime they sat down with him, he would just run circles around him.
That's...
So this Halloween show on the 31st, 1964, he takes a break from doing shows, and his next show is in fucking... Hold on, I got Oreos in my mouth. I got some quarantine Oreos. Okay, so his next show is either April or May. I think it might be March of 1964, and it's at fucking Newport Folk Festival. Wait, it wasn't 65. No, he definitely was there in 64 and 65. Anyways, he was one of the 2 years. So he goes to Newport Folk Festival, and Newport Folk Festival is like his thing. It's like his home base. He's headlining every year that thing goes up.
According to Wikipedia, he did 63, 64, and 65 was when he went electric and did the big reveal, I guess.
So fucking... This is his home base, right? This is where everyone comes to see him. So how Newport Folk is built in the 60s is in the morning they do these little like folk workshops, and folk musicians teach you how to write a song, how to play your guitar. So he comes out and he does a couple of acoustic songs in the morning, and people are like, oh my God, your stuff's so good. I love you. Oh my God. And at night is when his headline slot is. So he comes out in the morning, he plays a couple of songs, he says a couple of whatever words, just fluff and stuff. So at night, he comes out with a full band and like an organ and shit, and people are freaking out. They're like, what is this? He opens up his case and he pulls out this black Stratocaster that Paul Butterfield lent him. Bob Dylan had been planning this all winter. He had flown to Laurel Canyon and hung out with the Byrds, who were recording an electric version of Mr. Tambourine Man, which was a song that he had been playing. And they had heard it and like, wow, this is really cool. We need to do an electric version of this. When he heard the Byrds play it electric, he went, oh, I want to do that. So he had flown to Laurel Canyon for the winter, hung out, flown back to New York, and started working on my favorite Bob Dylan album, which is Bringing It All Back Home. And Bringing It All Back Home is a halvesies album because Columbia wouldn't let him do an entire electric album. They forced him to do the first half as electric and the second half as just acoustic. The reason they did that is because they thought that, obviously, the folk music was considered like scripture, like it was biblical, like you couldn't fuck with it. And for him, like the peak of folk music to go electric was total sin. Like it was a complete drawback on everything that he'd done, because electric music was totally commercial and only people like the Beach Boys and the Beatles were playing electric music. And the Beatles loved Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan was their favorite artist by far.
I've heard about that, yeah. Like I think they went to India together at some point, like 65 or 66.
Yeah, Bob Dylan turned him on to weed, but everybody knows that.
Yeah.
So he comes out, he plugs in the electric guitar, he starts playing the third track on Bringing It All Back Home, Maggie's Farm. And he did get booed, but it wasn't nearly as much as people used to say. Some of these live recordings of him playing Maggie's Farm from Newport Folk actually have fake boos on them that people added after the fact to make it seem worse. It was a mixed response, but people weren't like throwing beer bottles and shit at him like that. That comes later. But like he played Maggie's Farm, he played a couple of other tracks, but generally the response was really mixed.
How many songs did he play before leaving?
I thought he played 3.
Yep. Okay, he played 3.
See, I want to dispel this rumor because he doesn't get like super booed. I think a lot of Dylan super fans like to say, "Oh, he got super booed and he got beer bottles thrown at." That's not really what happened. It was definitely a mixed response. I would say that fucking his electric stuff that he was playing in 1966, and this is when he started doing tours. And in 65, he wasn't allowed by Columbia to tour with his electric stuff because his tour was booked before he was doing electric stuff. And Columbia wanted to make sure that he still got the folk crowd before he moved on to his next thing.
Yeah.
So imagine this, right? You record all of your new music, and then you get booted out onto tour somewhere across the world like London and France, and you have to play your older stuff while your new stuff is currently in circulation. That's gotta be weird, right?
The weird control that we gave that they were allowed to have is bizarre.
Yeah.
Where like you read about like the weird like movie producer stuff where they're like, yeah, they were allowed to just make people marry each other to sell movies.
Yeah. Back in like the 40s and like 50s and 60s. According to the Wikipedia, again, not the most reputable source, but I feel like the Wikipedia for Bob Dylan has been vetted fair enough over time, given how many like massive Dylan nerds there are.
Yeah.
No disrespect, of course. So he left after 3 songs. One version has it like I think like the kind of generally maybe misunderstood version is that the boos were happening just because he came out with his electric guitar and the full band and was playing like the new songs. But an alternative account says that there was poor sound quality and that like one of the MCs announced that it was going to be like a really short set. So people were just mad at the fact that not only were they getting like a really short set, but there were like sound issues and like they couldn't hear anything like properly or something, which would be frustrating just in general.
Well, because there's I don't know if it's in the wiki. I read in an article. Pete Seeger, the legendary folk singer, is credited as saying he wanted to take an axe to Dylan's rig, but he's like, no, I wanted to take an axe to the sound system because it sucked.
It is one of those things that slowly changed over time.
Yeah.
One of the things about Pete Seeger taking an axe is originally it was, he's trying to cut the cords.
But I was furious that the sound was so distorted you could not understand a word that he was singing. He was singing a great song, Maggie's Farm, a great song, but you couldn't understand it. And I ran over to the sound man and said, fix the sound so you can understand him. And they hollered back, no, this is the way they want it. I don't know who they was. But I was so mad, I said, damn, if I had an axe, I'd cut the cable right down. I really was that mad.
Mm-hmm. Then he updated it to, I just wish I could have destroyed the sound system because it sounded so bad for him. Mm-hmm. The thing that I read in one of these Bob Dylan biographies that now I can't reference, so this is completely non-sourced, so whatever, is that Pete Seeger's dad was in attendance backstage, and his dad was a huge Bob Dylan fan, and Pete Seeger's dad came across country to see him, and he went out with the electric thing, and it was giving his dad a migraine. So he was trying to unplug the things at the end of the set so that the electric feedback would stop. But again, it was all speculation, blah, blah, blah. If you watch any dramatization of this event, you'll see Pete Seeger famously trying to cut the cords on it so that he could stop. Pete Seeger was like the number one Bob Dylan fan of that era. I don't know if he really would have hated him that much to like try to destroy his sound system.
To literally physically take an axe.
Mm-hmm. So he gets done with Newport Folk. He goes on this tour. He ends up in London, and people are really upset with his new sound, but they're still there listening intently at his old sound. Like, it really wore him down to have to go out and play his older songs while his newer songs were still out there, especially because he didn't get to hang out with his friends. He brought Robbie Robertson with him on the 1965 acoustic tour.
Like as a band member or like as an opener?
Huh?
Did he bring Robbie Robertson like as like someone to open for him, or like was Robbie Robertson playing in the band?
His friend is like sitting with him. If you watch Don't Look Back, Robbie Robertson is in every other scene that they're sitting backstage, or he didn't open for him. He was in his band because obviously Robbie Robertson and the Hawks went on to be the band.
The band.
He brought him with him on tour just to like hang out, and the two of them just raised hell the entire time they were out. Like they were having wild, loud parties. There's one scene in particular where they play at a really old English venue, and while they're in the green room, there's a piano in the room that they said was like 100 years old, and at that point would have been like an 1850s piano, right? And right after Bob leaves to go on stage, Robbie Robertson takes a beer bottle and cracks the beer bottle open on the piano and gets wood chips into his beer while trying to open it. They raise so much hell while they're on this 65 tour, and every time he goes out there, he looks like he wants to fucking kill himself because he hates playing all of his old music. He gets to play stuff like Mr. Tambourine Man.
Yeah.
Fun fact, Mr. Tambourine Man was Hunter S. Thompson's favorite Bob Dylan song.
Interesting.
He gets to play stuff like It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, and basically anything on the second half of Bringing It All Back Home, and stuff that ends up on 61 with a full band he plays acoustically. Mm-hmm. He gets done with that tour. He comes back and he goes to Columbia and he's like, hey, I got a backing band. Their name is the Hawks, and my best friend, Robbie, is the leader of the Hawks. He says that they want to go on tour. Columbia says, this is still a terrible idea. You're going to crash your whole career. You should not do this. They agree. Again, like you said, it's ridiculous how much control that these record labels had. They agree to do a 50-50 tour where Bob Dylan's folk acoustic stuff will be the first half and his electric stuff will be the second half. And he goes, all right, that's fine with me. He doesn't have any openers for this tour because his music is already 2-some hours long. So he does this tour, and I actually have a really cool box set that I got while I used to work at Down in the Valley Records in Golden Valley.
Oh, yeah.
That's
We've been there, It's a cool stop.
Set. It has every single, because they recorded all these, every single recording from the 1966 Electric Tour. And he had already, in 1966, come out with my just absolutely bonkers album, Blonde, this whiskey's hit me different, Blonde on Blonde.
Yeah.
And this is a full electric album. It's got some slower stuff on the backhand side. And while he was recording Blonde on Blonde, he was writing all the time. They would do these sessions where members of the band would say, oh, yeah, so we did these recording sessions where Bob would say, everybody has to be here at 9 p.m. We all show up at 9 p.m. And we'd play cards until, like, midnight. And then at midnight, he comes into the room. He says, okay, I write this song. We put it all in, and we just wrote Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. Like, that's how he wrote for all these. Mm-hmm. So he would get the band together. He would tell them all the parts. They would just play all the way through. And it was a lot of, like, assuming how to play the music. Bob Dylan would come in and say, hey, this is in the key of D, and it's a blues song. And they would play it how they assumed that he wanted it played. Mm-hmm. And then he would play it back, and he'd be like, all right, this is cool. So he comes out with Blonde on Blonde. He's like 2.5 albums deep into this electric thing.
Yeah.
And so when he goes out on tour in 1966, he opens with the folk stuff, and people love it. He opens with The Times They Are A-Changin' every single time, and he rushes through it every single time. People love it. When he comes out with his electric stuff, some people leave, and then the people that stay fucking heckle the shit out of him the entire time that he's up there. And
that's like when people come for an opener and then they like forget to leave before the main person comes on, and they're just like drunk and mad at that point.
Yeah, they've been drinking beers all throughout this whole thing. And again, it's classic Dylan in the 60s vibes when he's up there with his acoustic guitar. Mm-hmm. Dead silent crowd. They listen to every single word that comes out of his mouth. He plays them all perfect. They applaud him. When his electric band comes out, it's usually like a 10 to 15 minute break where they pull the curtains, everything gets set up, they pull the curtains back out, and then he comes in and they just fucking heckle the shit out of him. His set list rarely changed for his electric set. And he usually opened with this very, very cool song called Tell Me Mama. And it's one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs. And personally for me, that's like the birth of punk rock, is this song Tell Me Mama. It's 1966. The only other band that is close to writing music like this Tell Me Mama song is Black Sabbath in their garage at the time.
Yeah, because their album didn't come out for 4 years. Their first album didn't come out till 70.
Exactly. So they're like in their garage writing this stuff. Fucking these lyrics on, and I got this thing pulled up here. These lyrics on this thing are unbelievable. He's saying shit like fucking, oh man, I'm not even listening to the song, so I don't even know. He's talking about like tombstones and coffins and killing yourself, and he's got these really cool metaphors about trying to get kids to work for you like your hammers do. And he drops this whole song, he gets to the end of it, and when the last note plays, everyone starts booing him. He's like, fuck you. He goes into the next song, and it's a remix of his older song, I Don't Believe You. Like, this electric set doesn't change throughout the entire time because he's perfected it. He knows exactly what the set lists are going to look like every time he goes out there. He plays I Don't Believe You, which is a song that has been in his repertoire since he was a young New York coffee guy in 1963. He follows it closely with Baby Let Me Follow You Down and Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues. These are both really bluesy songs. They're not really protest songs. They're just like kind of depressing songs. He has his Blonde on Blonde track, Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat, which is the straight up blues song that he probably learned somewhere in the South. He follows it up with a really classic like folk rock band song called One Too Many Mornings. And then he gets into his last 2 songs, which are the biggest hitters in his set, which are Ballad of a Thin Man. And Ballad of a Thin Man is a song about what we talked about earlier, about the modern reporter. And he goes into this really long, drawn-out sequence about this reporter who is a little bit older, not really as hip as all the new young kids. And he is trying so hard to find out what is so hip, and he's trying so hard to find out what's cool, and he keeps stumbling on these weird things that that the kids do or that the kids all know, and he just can't catch up. So that's what that chorus line is, you know, don't you, Mr. Jones? Is that he can't keep up with all of the cool stuff, all the hip stuff, and now he's trying to keep up with things like the Black Panther Party, which reporters in the mid-'60s had absolutely no idea how to cover because it was this really aggressively proud black movement that these rich white reporters from Rolling Stone had no idea what to do with.
Yeah.
So his last song in his set for each of these electric ones is one we haven't covered yet, is Like a Rolling Stone. Now, Like a Rolling Stone is about his fans. He wrote it as a protest to his own fans, and here's why. So he had seen, since JFK's death, this movement away from this authenticity of folk music, of hip culture, of beatnik culture, and he had now moved on from the folk movement, but his folk fans had not moved on from the folk movement. And he wrote this song, which, what was it? My friend Brian lives with me, right? And Like a Rolling Stone opens with a really aggressive snare drum hit. When you listen to it, the first note of the song is a snare drum hit. And my friend Brian, his dad is a little bit older than other dads. And he says that he knows that snare drum hit is like a bullet that killed the folk movement. He said that when he heard that song for the first time, he was like, wow, that's what that was. That was Bob Dylan shooting the folk movement dead with that snare drum hit. How cool is that? Oh, I'm almost done with this. Whiskey. Hold on.
Just gotta
are you guys bored of this yet? Are you bored of this? Are you bored? You losing me? Okay.
No.
We're tracking.
So these lyrics for Like a Rolling Stone, the chorus is, how does it feel to be without a home, like a complete unknown, like a Rolling Stone? So when Bob Dylan showed up to New York City, he had left from Hibbing, and, you know, different accounts say that Bob traveled to different parts of the country. Some people say that he went right from Hibbing to New York City. He traveled from Hibbing because he had heard that his musical idol, Woody Guthrie, was sick and dying in a New York hospital. So he left Hibbing with a guitar in like 1961. And he's like, I'm going to go see Woody just to say bye because, you know. So he gets there. He hangs out with Woody Guthrie in his hospital room for like 6 months. And then Woody Guthrie passes away. When he passes away, Bob Dylan doesn't want to go back to Hibbing because obviously, fuck, have you ever been to Hibbing? That place is super depressing.
It's a town.
So
objectively.
What?
I said it's a town.
It is a town. It does have a name.
It does have a name.
There are buildings, probably.
There's failed industry there.
So he shows up in New York City. His idol has just passed away, and he has no home. Nobody knows who he is. So he just starts playing coffee shops. That's the feeling that he's trying to get across to his fans when he alienates them on this track.
Yeah.
And this track includes such just great lines with like, you used to laugh about everyone that was hanging out. Now you don't talk so loud. Now you don't seem so proud about having to be scrounging for your next meal. It's still a protest song, but it's a protest song against his fans that he feel like took him for granted or have been left behind in the dust.
More bands should do that. I'm just going to say that.
Go ahead.
More bands should do that. Like, if their fans suck, like, write a song about how much your fans suck and just put it out and just let it speak for itself and piss them all off because they deserve it.
Yeah, I would say so.
Fucking, he's getting booed every night, and he goes out there and plays his regular songs, and people love it, and then he plays the songs he wants to play, and people boo him. He builds this set list to end with that song so that anyone that's still there gets to hear how fucking mad he is at them for staying.
Yeah. Question, though. Kind of arbitrary, because fuck Rolling Stone, but where does Like a Rolling Stone rank on the Rolling Stone greatest songs of all time list?
Like you're challenging me?
I'm seeing if you know, because it's a pretty notable number.
Is it what's the we'll get within 5 places?
It's close enough. I'll say within 2.
Plus or minus 2 spaces?
Plus or minus 2, because it's out of 500, but it's a pretty notable number.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's number 3 because they probably put Day in the Life by the Beatles at number 1.
It's
what
number
is it?
1. Like Rolling Stone is number 1.
What? Where'd they put Day in the Life?
I'm gonna double check. I'm guessing number 2 then, because that would be my guess. Because fucking Rolling Stone loves the Beatles, rightfully so, but like go almost as much as they unrightfully love U2. Oh no! What the hell? Number 2 is I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones.
Great. Well, let me just say, I think the Rolling Stones are the worst fucking band of all time. But continue.
Number 3 is fucking John Legend's Imagine.
Wait,
Oh my
why
God,
do you think the Rolling Stones is the worst band? I'm not like a Rolling Stones fan, but I was just interested to know your reasoning for that.
Okay, fuck, we'll take a little sidebar here. The Rolling Stones are the worst band of all time, and here's why. So, the Rolling Stones are the worst band of all time because when the Beatles were getting started, now it's slipping my mind. Now I'm not so confident anymore. The Beatles are from Liverpool, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Beatles are from Liverpool. They loved American blues music like there was no tomorrow. They would get records shipped in. They wore leather jackets and the dumb little Marlon Brando hats and glasses. They really did love American blues music. And then when they got signed to whatever record label they got signed to, I don't know what one it is for them, they were spiced up and they were put on little suits and they got little bowl cuts, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles were bad boys.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
At the time,
Rolling Stones were not bad boys. They were middle-class white guys who were signed by a record label to make music, and they weren't even good at making music. They were signed to make like an opposite effect of Beatles. So they were supposed to be dressed up in like slick leather outfits. Fucking John Lennon, however you feel about him, he's probably a piece of shit guy, and Paul McCartney used to write songs all the time together, and they would just sit together and write songs. They had to force Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, like lock them in a broom closet to make them write together because they were so bad at writing songs.
Yeah. So
the Rolling Stones were the biggest scam in the 60s, and I hate them so much.
I've never listened. I've only listened to a full Rolling Stones album once, so I'm not too beholden to them.
Fun fact: so John Spencer of the John Spencer Blues Explosion had his first like noise band called Pussy Galore.
As you do.
Yeah.
They covered Exile on Main Street in its entirety, and it's something because they're just like full on like New York noise rock. And it's
amazing.
It's amazing.
So actually, Day in the Life is number 23, and it was later revised to be number 28 on the Rolling Stones top 500 songs. The highest Beatles song is actually Hey Jude at number 8. But as I said, John Lennon's Imagine is number 3.
Oh.
Of all fucking songs.
You know, there's a lot of downsides to this quarantine beer flu business. I would say getting our Floodwater Angel Fine Line show canceled is number 2, and number 1 is having to see that fucking Twitter video of the celebrity singing Imagine.
I hate that. But have you seen the versions
you can
where it's
put
like
that in the YouTube video? So he plays 2 nights at Manchester, and here's the thing about the recording is that this event happened at Manchester Hall. But for some reason, I don't even know, from the future forward, they say that it happened at Royal Albert Hall, and it didn't. So anytime that you see a recording that says Royal Albert Hall on it for this Bob Dylan event, it was actually at Manchester Hall. So
did they change the name or anything, or like, what do you think that is?
So the Royal Albert Hall is obviously a very, very famous concert venue, and he played at the Royal Albert Hall, but this specific event happened at a different venue called the Manchester Hall, and in consequential bootlegs, it states that it happened at Royal Albert Hall, but it didn't. It happened at Manchester Hall, and I know this because I'm the expert. So he plays Manchester Hall in May of 1966. I have this bootleg in front of me that's very cool. It's on purple vinyl, and it sounds like shit. He plays 2 nights in a row. And I don't know if this person had seen both and knew what was going to happen, but he finishes his second night in his second acoustic set. He gets done with Ballad of a Thin Man, and they're trying to tune up, and this hole night. The crowd has been terrorizing them. They were clapping off beat in the middle of songs to see if they could throw the band off their rhythm.
What the hell?
That's some guerrilla level shit. So they were clapping off beat in the middle of songs, trying to throw them off their rhythm.
Thank you
He
for the
was trying to
illustration.
count them off into songs like Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat, and they were clapping to stop him from counting the band off. Yeah, no, they were trying to really throw him off. They get all the way to the end of Ballad of a Thin Man, and they're just getting heckled. Someone throws a beer bottle at stage, and it crashes against the bass amp. And
better than
someone
the
in
guitar
the
amp.
upper deck screams Judas and calls Bob Dylan Judas, which if you've listened to any Bob Dylan music, you know that he's like a biblical guy. He talks about the Bible all the time.
Yeah.
So to be called Judas at his own concert is like
hell?
the extra level
That's some dramatic
insult that you would
bullshit.
have to throw at him. And it really does drive just a big stake into his heart while he's up on stage. And he says,
I don't believe you. You're a liar.
I don't believe you. And then he calls that guy a liar.
Yeah.
And you can hear this on recordings if you want to find this. It's, again, called Royal Albert Hall, but it's at Manchester Hall for Like a Rolling Stone. He turns to the band. He cranks up his own Stratocaster, and he says, play it fucking loud. And then he plays the hardest version of that Like a Rolling Stone song you've ever heard.
Yeah,
Shoot.
I've seen that because I think there's video of it somewhere. I remember seeing a video on YouTube where he's like, it just says, yeah, it's the most punk rock thing I think I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. He does have it on video because he's got Penn Baker with him filming the whole
okay,
thing.
yeah.
It's a very hard to find documentary called Eat the Document, and it's all over the place as a documentary. It doesn't really have a good structure to it, and it was never supposed to come out, but he came out with it anyways. So there's video of it, and he says, play it fucking loud, and he cranks his Stratocaster up, and then he just screams into the mic for 5 solid minutes, and he just ascends to heaven on that point. He gets back from that 66 tour, and his manager, Albert Grossman, great guy, he ended up managing Janis Joplin after Bob Dylan fell out of touring. Fucking Albert Grossman, when he comes back from London, says, hey, great news, I scheduled you 88 more tour dates for the summer.
Jeez.
And Bob Dylan is just heartbroken, and he's like, oh my God. He gets back in June, and he's supposed to go back out on the road in July for 88 more dates all the way through October. And he doesn't get there because at some point in the summer of 1966, it either happens or it doesn't happen. Bob Dylan gets into a motorcycle accident in Woodstock, New York, and he swerves off the road. He connects with a tree, and a lot of people say that it was faked because Bob Dylan's favorite movie and story was Billy the Kid. And Billy the Kid was a cowboy who faked his own death and went into hiding to get away from all of his debts and all the people that wanted to kill him. So in 1966, he either he does or he doesn't. Gets into a motorcycle accident, says, oh man, I can't. And then they cancel all of his tour dates, and he doesn't tour again for some time. And that was the end of his electric period, because when he comes back out again, he is a folk rock superstar, and he's perfected his act. But that's the end of Bob Dylan going electric.
You've been listening to an Ear Coffee production.